This podcast is made possible by Vena. Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode of Planning Aces, we'll be featuring the FP&A insights and commentary of three finance leaders, including CFO Dayton Kellenberger of Vendavo, CFO Celeste Packard of Fair Market, and CFO Jason Quinn of Vendor. This is Jack Sweeney, your co-host, along with performance management guru Brett Knowles, who will serve as co-host and resident thought leader as we seek to highlight the takeaways from our distinguished group of Planning Aces. We'll begin after this. Managing multiple spreadsheets, disconnected data, numbers you just can't trust. Your finance team can't be the strategic partner your organization needs right now with obstacles like that getting in your way. Vena can change that. Vena brings people, processes, and systems together in a single collaborative analytical platform so you can drive connected business planning and better decision making. And it's the only native Excel complete planning platform built for Microsoft 365 with Power BI embedded. With Vena, your financial and operational data is always connected, and your teams are always armed with insights and time to focus on what matters most. So when the stakes are high and the margin for error low, plan with agility, plan with resilience, plan with Vena so you can be prepared for whatever comes next. Visit venasolutions.com/planningaces to learn more about how Vena will help you plan for anything. Hi, it's Jack, and I'm here with Brett Knowles. Brett, where are you? Are you lakeside or are you out in the country?
No, I'm in the big city today, as a matter of fact. So I'm in that interesting pause between flight number one and flight number two. So,
Are you headed to Europe or what's your destination?
well, I just got back from Europe, and yes, tomorrow is the U.S. So this is the day you get to change personal time zones in your brain. It's also black fly season up north, and so it's a good time to not be up north.
Well, as a northerner, aka Canadian that you are, I think it's been 30 days since we last spoke. So permit me to offer my condolences for your countryman, Gordon Lightfoot.
Well, and so, it may or may not be a coincidence that he passed away on the very day that the Toronto Maple Leafs finally made it to the second round of the Stanley Cups, and we hadn't done so in about, 50 odd years. So many people speculated it was that shock that sent him over the edge, because everything in Canada relates to hockey, don't you know?
So you continue to tell us, but let me just mention I think you indicated you were pleased with this week's chosen selected Planning Aces. I have to say, I teed them up pretty much each with the same question. And of course, they took the ball and run with it. Am I right? You were rather impressed by all of what was shared.
Well, certainly, I think that the most important thread is whatever question you asked them was awesome. You got to ask that question more often. Like the answers you got back were incredibly interesting. One of the problems that we have as accountants and planners is that we keep on using the same old tricks, and possibly because we keep on looking at the same old data. And what's interesting about these three is they all gave us interesting twists on what you can look at, and all of them brought forward metrics that I think most organizations have. And so it's not an issue that we can't do this, it's an issue of considering what our strategy is and our values and what are the best metrics for us to use. So I think your listeners will be quite entertained by this because it's going to provoke them into thinking about other ways of monitoring how their businesses are performing.
Well, should I tee up our first clip, or is there a?
That's what I would do if I were you.
Okay. So our first clip will be Dayton Kellenberger, now CFO of Vendavo. Now we'll be dropping his episode after this one, so this will be a nice little teaser for our listeners to want to tune in to Dayton's full episode, which I thought was really a standout episode for us. His episode will be number 904. Dayton came up the finance ranks, spending really cut his FP&A teeth at Coleman Company. I think of them as the lantern and camping company. But he shares quite a few career insights along the way as he shares with us his career journey, so you'll want to tune in for those. Now, the question, of course, that I was posing to him here, I was really leaving it rather broad and open-ended. I'm asking for a business dynamic or metric that he's looking to raise the profile of across the company, or educate the organization about a set of metrics. And what would come to mind? Does any set of metrics come to mind? I was keeping it very, very broad, very open-ended. And here's what he shared.
I think the first piece is, overarchingly, we want to make sure that we're focusing the business on the key metrics that matter. And so we shifted how we do our monthly business unit reviews. Typically every month we would bring the business leaders together and we would walk through each different departmental functional area, and they would present on their initiatives and what's happening in their business. And while it was a good broad overview of the organization, we kind of lacked the teeth on so what? What does that mean for the business? And so we shifted how we run that to much more of a metrics-based focus on the numbers, and then understand the story once we understand the numbers. And so it's become a much uglier meeting in terms of we just pull up a spreadsheet and we look at the numbers that matter for each department. But what it's done is it's cut the fluff out, and it's cut some of the storytelling out, and it's really allowed us to tell the story through data. So and to kind of get to the second part of your question, one of the areas that I focused on a lot over the last year and a half was our SaaS gross margins. So our software product is obviously the value driver for our organization, and every percentage point that we can unlock from a gross margin perspective adds a lot of value to the organization. But it's a very cross-functional effort. So the costs that go into your gross margins for SaaS are going to be your infrastructure. How much does it cost to host your product? It's going to be your support team. It's going to be part of your customer success team. And then on the top line, you've got to understand your pricing model. You've got to understand any migrations you're doing from legacy on-prem into the cloud. So it's a very complicated metric that spans across the organization. So what we did was institute a FinOps practice to bring people across the organization together to make sure that we tackled three core things. The first one would be, let's make sure that we're selling our products correctly on the front end. So let's make sure we fully understand what the margin implications are of the price of the software we're selling. Because if we're pricing it wrong on the front end, then nothing that we do on the back end is going to matter. We've dug ourselves a hole that we can't get out of. So that's the first step. The second one is, how do we optimize the infrastructure that we support our customers with? So whether we're on Azure or we're on AWS or you're on Oracle Cloud, how do you manage that spend in the proper way where you're not over purchasing for the capacity you need to support your customers? Where appropriate, you're entering into pre-buy agreements with an AWS or an Azure so that you can get the best possible rates. That's going to drive down the cost to deliver an individual piece of software. And then the third piece is, how are we supporting our customers? Do we have support resources in the right parts of the world? Are we optimized from a size of team and the size of our customer success team. And all of those things together combine to what is the gross margin of our product that we sell. And it's an effort that includes finance, it includes sales, it includes our cloud ops teams, and it includes our customer success team. So, I think for us across the board, it's how do we make people focus more on the key metrics that matter across the org, and then how do we bring teams together to actually create action plans to improve those metrics over time.
All right, Dayton Kellenberger. I thought he was going to share something almost repetitive with something we had heard recently, but then he builds, and the three questions at the end were just become wonderful takeaways. I'm sure you had a similar experience. I saw you had a gleam in your eye there, Brett.
Well, I thought he was a brilliant magician because for the first part of his show, I was like falling asleep. And I'll recap, but it was same old. And the last part, he pulled this bunny out the hat, like all sorts of really thought-provoking things. So the first part, he described what we've all been encumbered with, right? We've got the standard set of key measures, and we have these monthly meetings. And this is my terminology, not his, but they turn into show and tell. What does show and tell look like? Like a kindergarten, we say, oh, here's our latest numbers, and this is what happened, and weren't we good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just show and tell. And the problem is this. The problem is when you have one of these meetings, you have all these brains together, and the purpose is to use those brains to solve issues, to, discuss and discover to solve. And when we're playing show and tell, that's not happening. You got one person speaking and 8 people falling asleep. And that's not a productive use of time. Like that summary you could read in the newspaper, or you could do a video in advance, and I could take a look at it before the meeting. And that gives me the benefit of being able to think about it so that when I go to the meeting, I have much better recommendations. And so the first part, he admits that, those monthly meetings were turning into, my terminology, show and tell. And then he sort of slid into saying, well, and then we do this deep dive in the spreadsheets, which to me is also uninteresting. We can all deep dive in the spreadsheets by ourselves. We can do some work to get some shared understanding, but again, it's nothing that's interesting. And then he talks about, SaaS gross margins, and the idea that the software product is a value driver. Yeah, that's open for debate. But then the bunny comes, right? The bunny is when he said, well, we've developed this FinOps practice, and he's put together this cross-functional team that he calls FinOps. And he says that we look at 3 key questions, and take out your number 2 pencils, because these are brilliant questions. You got to take note of them. One is, are we selling correctly? Which has to do with the right customer, the right margin. And that's an important question, because so often we're selling in a way that decreases our profitability, decreases our growth, consumes resources. Then the second one is, like, once you get a check mark on that one, then the second question is, how are we optimizing our infrastructure? And this is the problem that we all have. We only have so many people in customer support. We only have so many people in dev. We only have so many people in each of our departments. And are we optimizing them? Are we getting the maximum return for their time and effort? And often organizations are out of balance. They've got one department that's working too hard and the other department that's, not working hard enough. And that causes, stress at the leadership team table. But ultimately, your job as a manager, and the reason we've got these different brains around the table, is to optimize that equation. Then the third thing he asked, which is the real acid test, is, are we supporting our customers? And so each customer needs something different from us. And the customer-facing attribute is important. And I'm not sure whether I would actually move that up to the second question. Are we supporting our customers correctly? Once I get that answered, am I optimizing use of my resources? But the net is, those are the right 3 questions. Are we selling correctly? Are we optimizing? Are we supporting correctly? So that part, I thought, were 3 interesting metrics that every organization could have indicators of tomorrow.
What did you make of the deployment of the FinOps team?
The dilemma with FinOps, as you just said, is it begins to make you think you're focusing just on margin and financial metrics. What you're really trying to do is optimize both things, like optimize operations within the financial constraints. So you could call it Ops Fin instead of FinOps, but since it's his team, probably that's why Fin went first. Maybe he's doing it alphabetically, but you could call it anything. You could call it our profitability SWAT team, our strategy SWAT team, a cross-functional knowledge team. The dilemma with Burger Kings is it's really tough to sell breakfast food when your name is Burger King, right? The title gets you the battle even before you've begun. FinOps is setting up a battle that you don't need to have. If I ignore the title and go, do I have a team that's looking at selling correctly? Selling correctly means, am I identifying the right customer? Am I using the right process? When I sell it, am I making the right promises that we can deliver on? When I try to deliver it, am I meeting the obligations made? Like, that's not a financial question. That is all about selling correctly. I mean, that's a brilliant question. Now, the outcome is going to be more sales, more profitability, but I'm looking at a broader context as, am I selling correctly? And part of it is I can only sell what I can make, and I can only make what I sell. Like, how do I optimize across those departments? And we know that many times these departments work in silos. So the reason I like that first one is you've got to figure out what does selling correctly mean, and then figure out, the 8 blind people and the elephant, how do we connect this together to build the elephant?
Okay, well, our next planning eighth is CFO Celeste Ackert of Fair Market. Now, she's from episode 902, just released a short while ago. Her career journey is interesting. She climbed the FP&A ranks, not unlike Dayton. Here, she will look back on a chapter spent at Sumo Logic, where she was a senior vice president of finance. Let's permit her to tell the story. She does it very well, and what comes through is her passion for FP&A and the job, and the enthusiasm you can just sense throughout. So this is CFO Celeste Ackert.
Yeah, I would label this one as a really unexpected opportunity to add incredible value and insight. So, a year or two into my journey at Sumo Logic, we ended up creating some really powerful customer contribution margin analysis. And so, to frame this up, at the time, we had chosen an FP&A tool to implement and moved from reporting and planning on Google Sheets and Excel. We held things pretty centrally. We had the intention of opening things up with key business partners and budget owners as we scaled, but we ended up choosing more of a planning platform that we could integrate and marry different data sources. So from NetSuite, we had our GL data. Our CRM data, Salesforce, we had bookings data and pipeline data. Our ATS system, we had our recruiting data, and we had our HRS and payroll system. So all of this in one place was incredibly powerful. For instance, we could look at specific sales teams or regions. We could understand the fully loaded costs of that team, and we could compare that to their sales or pipeline, et cetera, all in the same dashboard. We could also do scenario planning on hiring and reps in specific regions and teams via different sourcing channels, whether they were internal, external, referral, et cetera. So where the aha moment came was on how can we more broadly share this powerful data. And my team had really started digging into kind of the company's unit costs. And being a big data company, Sumo Logic, there was considerable cost of sale along with that, and primarily AWS costs. So we dug into the AWS data for a number of reasons. We needed to better understand and break out production versus engineering costs. There was different costs per AWS hosting region. So we needed to be all over this in order to forecast accurately. So similar to how we married bookings and sales data with payroll and other costs, we planned out how we could take our thousands of customers and create a form of contribution margin by customer. And we showed and displayed this using a single common unit cost. We had the contracted amount that customers paid us. We knew which AWS region the data was hosted. We could estimate and allocate that cost. So we could show which customers were profitable and dilutive. And it was a dashboard. So you could search and pull up the customer individually. You could look at things in cohorts, and you could really understand the contracted economics. So I remember this project being one of those from design inception that you just wanted to stay late at work, map it out on a whiteboard. And there was so much excitement for myself and the team to contribute to this. And I recall our execs, CRO, all had access and they used this data regularly for multiple purposes. So I would categorize that as kind of this awesome moment that I have to lean back into.
Yeah, I mean, she makes clear she looks back at the period, the development of the dashboard is really something very satisfying for her and the team that was involved, and that, everyone understood they were part of something here that was really going to benefit the organization. It's nice when it when it works that way. What would you share?
I always think of golf where each club is supposed to do something. So an example is your 7-iron is supposed to be, used for hitting, 170 yards or something. But you can actually use that in a sand trap if the sand's wet. So the tool is meant for one thing, but actually has other uses that wasn't what it was designed for, but are pretty nifty. And so the outcome she was looking for was building some dashboard that connected those multiple departments. So almost like we heard with Dayton's question about, that how do I get a cross-functional team that looks across the silos? She's saying the same thing. How do I get a cross-functional dashboard that looks across the silos? And her answer was a 7-iron. No, it wasn't. It was a planning tool. So, what we all use in planning, obviously, our plans are the consolidation across those different silos. So it's a great tool that's designed to help us see across the silos. And so using it to build that cross-functional dashboard, I think is particularly brilliant. It's brilliant not only because it's using the tool for something different that it was designed for, but it does it incredibly well. But secondly, she's accidentally connected the dashboard that we look at on a weekly, monthly basis with the planning system. So often those are separated in organizations. The FP&A is different than, that operational dashboard. And so she chose a tool that allowed us to get the cross-functional dashboard, but at the same time, accidentally allows us that one view of the truth. And the issue is this, that often in those performance meetings, we make decisions that effectively change the plan, but the plan doesn't get updated. Now they're out of sync with each other. Because she's chosen to use the planning tool to build a dashboard, she has an unintended consequence of better integrating the planning cycle with the operations cycle.
Well, I think what she was describing might be a little more sophisticated, a step or two more sophisticated from what we have often heard about. Some version of a cross-functional dashboard exists in most organizations. It certainly wouldn't be as polished or as useful. Would you agree, or?
No, there's certainly not one flavor, and they've been called many things over the years. I mean, my background, the balanced scorecard, is really that cross-functional dashboard. OKRs are that cross-functional dashboard. We all know about BI, business intelligence. That's the cross-functional dashboard. So there's been, many iterations, many attempts to build that dashboard. And there are many software tools that are ideally suited for doing it. So people use Microsoft Power BI. That's a tool designed to harvest this data and give you a dashboard. And all those things are great. But again, the innovative thing she's done in that regard is choosing a planning tool to also produce the dashboard. Now, she doesn't mention the name of the tool, but if it's something like Anaplan, it has that dashboarding capability as well as the planning capability. So I think it's a very creative solution. The other thing she did is she moved beyond that to look at issues that we all deal with. So in her example, it's customer contribution, right? We all know that there's different levels of profitability. And in this new cloud world, it turns out that your cloud provider becomes a major component of that. And what she's doing, her story with AWS, is really just activity-based costing. How do I correctly allocate the cost of AWS to the appropriate customer and give us a customer contribution equation? So, if we go back to Dayton's point, he said three things. Remember, sell correctly, optimize, and are we supporting them correctly? This helps us with his second point. How do I optimize? How do I make sure I've got the right tools supporting the right customer? And so that customer cost profile that she's doing and that customer contribution allows us to optimize and see where we're out of sync. In other words, if our customers suddenly need a whole bunch more support, have I seen a shift in the budget and plan for the support team? Or has that customer need gone unstaffed, right? So Dayton's point is I'm no longer optimizing the equation, I'm sub-optimizing. I've got allocation of resources in the wrong spot.
Okay, well, let us share our third planning ace, who will be Jason Quinn, CFO of Vendr. Now Jason was episode number 892, shared his career journey, which began at Vistaprint. The mother company, I think, is Cimpress. He spent 5 years in Europe, part of that time spearheading M&A for the company. Across Europe, he was based in Barcelona. Interesting episode. You do want to not miss it. He was a senior finance executive at DraftKings. Truly another standout episode, I think, for FP&A listeners in particular. So I believe once more I was asking Jason about how to raise the profile of a metric within the organization, or his ability to create visibility across the organization. And here's some of what he shared.
Yeah, I tend to look at, and this is more of my potential operational background, I look at inside out. And so what most finance team members might look at ARR and they look at net retention, they look at gross retention. I do look at those things. Those to me are the scoreboard though. And so I spend time spinning up and looking at the input. And the input is your adoption healthy? Is your engagement healthy within your platform? Are the customers doing the right things that you want them to do within the space? And then do you feel like their time to value, and it's a continuous time to value? Are they consistently getting value out of what you're offering? And to me, if they are doing that really, really well, then the metrics usually show up in a great way. And so what I spent a lot of time on is what we call internally a success potential. And that success potential is your it's about technology. Do you absorb the technology in the right way? Do we have the right features and functionality? So functionality is another one. Does the customer have the competence, and do we have the competence to have a great conversation and to make sure that we have a great partnership, which is more skill? The next piece is resources. Do they have the willingness to put the resources, and do we have the right resources matched against the account based on what their goals are? And then the next element is expertise. So does our expertise, that when you call us for support, is our expertise holding up to what their expectations are and the expectations we set for them? The last piece, which is really important, is cultural. And the cultural aspects are, we have very specific cultural norms that we're trying to portray, which is leveling the playing field, which gets back to like fairness and transparency, but kindness as a service. We work really quickly, V for velocity, and we try to pursue truth. And the truth is, to fix sales or to fix market and have good efficiency and equilibrium, you got to pursue truth at all costs. And if people align to that, and then the last one's trust. If people align to that vision of build trust through transparency, essentially, there's some categories underneath which I just mentioned, then we have we're set up for a really good partnership together. And then there's a next step is desired outcomes, which is a component of what their goals are, but also how they want to experience getting that goal. So I think about it from a restaurant standpoint. You could order the steak and you could love the steak and it could be the best steak you ever cooked. But if you don't experience it in the right way, sometimes it's not success. And the same thing is in reverse, is it might not be as great of a steak, but if the experience was amazing, you still might go back and try another meal later. So we want both of those to work all the time. So when I look at success potential, desired outcomes, if we're doing those really, really well, then I usually see the metrics, the normal financial metrics, show up in really strong ways.
Well, I have to say, I like the analogy of the restaurant experience to illustrate the importance of both the desired outcome and the experience of achieving it. I think that worked very nicely. What there are many takeaways there. What got on your radar, Brett?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Like as you did, I enjoyed the fact that he said, there's table stakes, ARR, and all that kind of stuff. That's the scoreboard. He moved on to a conversation about inside out, which to me is only, leading versus lagging, right? What are the leading indicators? Adoption, engagement, the right things, the time to value, and so on. Those are now there's some interesting metrics there if you sort of decompose those. So things like measuring adoption, that's same old. Measuring engagement and that the customers are being engaged in the right way, that's interesting. Making sure that we're doing the right things, measuring time to value, which is an important metric that all of us could measure, but few of us do. And that's so important. And, the example we all think of is like Amazon. You order something today and sometimes it shows up today, sometimes it's tomorrow. Like the time to value is so short, you go, gosh, I wouldn't even bother going out to the corner store. I can get it faster through Amazon. And other things like, do you have the right functionality? I liked his explanation of our competency and the customer competency and making sure they're matched. And that's an important attribute. If you got a customer that's smarter than your support team, you got a problem. Or a support team that's smarter than the customer, you've got a different problem. And then he talks about resource matching. Now, those are all interesting. And if that's all he said, I would have been really thought that was a great series of points. But the second part of his conversation is even more interesting. He began talking about what he called cultural norms. And so he talked about things like level the playing field and kindness as a service, pursuing the truth, need for velocity, trust through transparency. And those are, what I would call values. But what he's talking about is, making sure that we get the desired outcomes. And the best example the example he gave is the best I've heard, right? He talked about, I could get an awesome steak, but if the ambiance and the service wasn't great, I might or might not go back. But if I had awesome service and a lousy steak, I might still go back because the lousy service trumps the steak. If I had both, wouldn't that be amazing? And so what does both look like? Well, both looks like the stuff he talked about at the beginning, right? The inside out, the adoption, engagement, the right things, right? That's making sure I get the steak right. And then he talks about getting the experience right, which is level the playing field, kindness of the service, and so on. And he's saying that those, the way I heard it, is those were just as important to him, or maybe even more so than the product attributes. And to me, that was a fascinating discovery that said on that scoreboard, yeah, we table stakes, I look at ARR. Then I took a look at the customer value equation, make sure I got adoption engagement. And then I take a look at the experience. And I need to make sure that all three of those things are correct.
Okay, so I see you have a marker in one hand and you're moving to your whiteboard. You have a plan, something you're going to share. What are you up to?
In summary, what Jason's talked about is I'm going to call it three categories of measures that we should pay attention to in the FP&A world. One is the overall scoreboard, and he talks about table stakes, things like ARR. The second thing is he talks about success potential, and those are kind of, as the title implies, leading indicators. So he talks about things like adoption rates. Are we seeing the right kind of engagement? Are they doing the right things? What's our time to value? So those are all success potentials. They're indicators that we're moving in the right direction. And he's saying, as we're doing our planning and plan review, are the plans we've laid delivering those things? Success potential. Then the third category he talks about is experiences, and are our plans delivering the right experience, right? And that's where, his steakhouse story comes in. And if we take a look at some of the attributes, I just want to touch on this for a second. So he talks about things like um, kindness as a service or pursuit of truth. And normally in the FP&A world, we'd say, well, those are great values, but how would I measure them? How do I set up a plan? How do I plan for value as a service or kindness as a service? And so the two parts of the answer are how do I measure it? So what you need to do is think about what would I see more of or less of if we delivered kindness as a service. So obviously we'd see things like better customer relationships, less customer turnover. We might see ourselves invited to customer events like golf tournaments or shows, whatever it might be, baseball games. So we can't actually measure are we being kind, but we can measure the consequences of being kind. And we get that data for free. And so that's one way. And tools like Expensify allow us to capture that stuff pretty darn easily. And so that's one way to begin capturing that. And the second part is, are we planning for it? So as I set up my plans, kindness as a service doesn't happen accidentally. And if you listen to what Jason said, clearly it was engineered. Well, he's thought through, what do I need to do that would make it look like we're being kind? And that's part of the service we provide. And make sure those budgets are set and make sure those budgets are consumed. And then, of course, measure the outcomes. So this is suggesting our planning process needs to also plan for, monitor, and respond to the experiences we deliver. And to me, that's the really important part of his communication because, and we've all experienced it. We've all experienced situations where our vendors have been super kind, and in your brain the sort of loyalty and support that you immediately have. And in a competitive situation, if I have a choice between two vendors, one that sees kindness as a service and one that doesn't, it's pretty easy to decide who I'm going to be doing business with.
Excellent. Brett Knowles, thank you for joining us. But wait. I did not know that the Edmund Fitzgerald was an actual ship that sank during a storm in Lake Superior in the mid 1970s. I thought it was from the 1800s that ship went down. I did not know that. Now you knew that. Don't tell me you knew that because I know you knew that.
Of course, everyone knows that. I mean, not only that, they found the wreck about, I'm going to say 3 years ago, so it was probably more like 5 or 10 or something. But actually, at Gordon's funeral, they rang the bell one time for each person that died on the Fitzgerald, and then one more time for him. It's interesting how fast we forget what we didn't have back then. Like, now we assume there'd be GPS and I could track people's cell phones and all that kind of stuff. Whereas, these days we get mad if the weather forecast is off by a couple of hours. Like, God darn it, they said it was going to rain at 2 and it's now 3 o'clock and it's not raining. Where that parable links up with today's conversation is many of our management systems were built back then. Like, they were initially designed by people like Drucker in the 50s, enhanced by people like me in the 80s. And they are so far out of date with what we currently have available. And so when we take a look at, conversations like you had with Jason, bringing forward things that would have been ludicrous way back when, like time to value and adoption rates and, and customers having the right engagement journey, let alone his conversation about values. Bear in mind the planning tools you're using weren't built around how we currently see organizations performing. And that's ignoring everything about the work from home world. So there's a huge gap between the level of technology that we have as FP&As and what is really needed to effectively plan our organization's existence.
Thank you, Brett Knowles. Thank you for that. That was a segue for the record books, by the way, from the Edmund Fitzgerald to modern performance management systems.
Yeah. Oh, maybe that's what I'm doing wrong. Okay, my friend, my wife is telling me it's time to pay attention to her. Okay.